Kim Tai stepped through the massive doors of the Galactic Juvenile Court, his sneakers squeaking against the polished crystal floor. The 18-year-old human looked tiny compared to the towering alien architecture around him. Purple energy beams danced across the ceiling, creating patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. The air smelled like ozone and something metallic he couldn't identify round him. Other young defendants sat waiting. A blue-skinned Zephyrian with forearms kept nervously tapping all his fingers on the bench. Two reptilian creatures from the outer rim hissed quietly to each other in their native tongue. A floating blob of green energy that might have been from the Andromeda sector pulsed anxiously near the prosecutor's table. Among all these strange beings, Ty's dark skin and simple earth clothes made him stick out like a sore thumb. Judge Morvick entered the courtroom with all the grace of a falling asteroid. The massive creature stood nearly 10 feet tall, covered in thick gray scales that clinked together when he moved. His 6 eyes swept across the courtroom with obvious disdain, lingering on each defendant like they were insects he wanted to squash. When those cold eyes landed on Ty, the judge's lip curled into what might have been a smile on a friendlier face, another worthless Earth primitive. Judge Morvick muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice sounded like gravel being ground in a cement mixer. Why do they even bother bringing these humans to trial? Just ship them back to their little mud ball and be done with it. Several alien court officers chuckled at the judge's comment. A few defendants from more advanced civilizations nodded in agreement. Ty kept his face neutral, but inside he felt the familiar sting of being dismissed before anyone even knew what he was capable of. Lee Hanna, his court-appointed defender, barely looked up when Ty sat down beside her. The middle-aged Korean woman wore expensive clothes that marked her as someone from one of Earth's more prosperous colonies, but her body language screamed that she didn't want to be here. She shuffled through her papers with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list, occasionally glancing at her wrist communicator to check messages from more important cases. Kim Tai, age 18, charged with unauthorized access to classified alien database systems. She read in a monotone voice, "Look, kid, just plead guilty and we can probably get you deportation instead of prison time. These alien courts don't mess around with cyber crimes." Ty nodded silently but didn't respond. His dark eyes moved across the courtroom, taking in details that others missed. The holographic displays showing case information flickered slightly every few seconds, a sign of outdated processing cores. The security scanners at the entrance still used quantum encryption protocols that Earth hackers had cracked years ago. Even the judge's podium had visible access ports that any decent programmer could exploit. The bailiff, a robot that looked like someone had crossed a spider with a filing cabinet, called the court to order. Its mechanical voice echoed through the chamber as it announced each case. When Ty's name was called, whispers rippled through the audience. Humans were rare this far from Earth, and most aliens had never seen one accused of sophisticated cybercrimes. Judge Morvack's 6 eyes focused on Ty like laser beams. "So, we have a little human boy who thinks he can play with grown-up technology," the judge said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, primitive, do you even understand what you're accused of?" Ty remained silent, his hands folded in his lap. This only seemed to annoy the judge more. "Speak up, Earthworm. Or are you too stupid to understand our superior language?" Lee Hannah elbowed Ty gently. "Just say yes, Your Honor, and we can get this over with," she whispered. But Ty wasn't paying attention to his lawyer. His mind was busy analyzing the courtroom systems, memorizing the network protocols he could see displayed on various screens. The aliens thought their technology was so advanced, so far beyond human understanding, They had no idea that their superior systems were full of holes that a smart kid from Earth could drive a spacecraft through. The prosecutor, a tall being with silver skin and no visible mouth, gestured dramatically as it presented the case through some kind of telepathic communication device. Charts and images appeared in the air, showing the databases Ty had allegedly accessed. Military defense plans, trade route schedules, even personal files of high-ranking officials. The list of his supposed crimes seemed endless. Judge Morvick nodded approvingly at each piece of evidence. Clearly this primitive somehow stumbled into our systems by accident and now must face the consequences of meddling with forces beyond his comprehension. The alien audience murmured in agreement. A few pointed at Ty and made sounds that were probably their species' version of laughter. In their minds, this was already over. Just another foolish human who had bitten off more than he could chew. But Ty sat quietly, watching and waiting. He had learned long ago that people often underestimated the quiet ones, and today that underestimation was going to cost them more than they could possibly imagine. The silence in the courtroom stretched on for what felt like forever. Judge Morvick had been droning on about human inferiority for nearly 10 minutes, his 6 eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he prepared to hand down what everyone expected would be a harsh sentence. The other alien defendants had stopped paying attention, already bored by what they assumed was just another routine case of human stupidity. Then Ty spoke. His voice cut through the judge's rambling like a laser through steel. Clear, calm, and absolutely confident. Your Honor, you cited Section 47B of the Intergalactic Defense Code, but that was amended 3 cycles ago during the Rigel Convention. The effect was immediate and electric. Every head in the courtroom snapped toward the young human. The floating green blob stopped pulsing. The four-armed Zephyrion's fingers froze mid-tap. Even the spider-like bailiff robot turned all its optical sensors toward Ty with mechanical precision. Judge Morvack's massive jaw dropped open, revealing rows of teeth that looked like they could bite through starship hull plating. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of complete shock in his species. What did you just say, primitive? Ty stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and respectful. Section 47B. Subsection 12. Regarding unauthorized system access by non-native species. The amendment specifically states that actions taken to prevent imminent security threats are exempt from prosecution, provided the individual can demonstrate legitimate intent to protect galactic infrastructure. Hark Jimin, the silver-skinned prosecutor, shot up from his seat like he'd been electrocuted. His telepathic communication device started sparking as his thoughts raced too fast for the machine to proc. S through the speaker. His translated voice crackled with disbelief. How could a human possibly know about classified legal amendments? The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Alien languages mixed together in a chaos of sound that the translation systems couldn't keep up. With some creatures were pointing at Ty with whatever appendages they had. Others were frantically checking their own legal databases on handheld devices. Leanna stared at her client like he'd just grown wings. She grabbed his arm and whispered urgently, "How do you know that? I'm a licensed interstellar attorney and I've never heard of that amendment." Ty glanced at her briefly before turning back to the judge. "I spent the last 6 months studying galactic law while investigating the security vulnerabilities ID. Discovered the Rigel Convention proceedings are available in the public archives, though most beings don't bother reading documents that long." Judge Morvack's scales were starting to change color, shifting from gray to a deep purple that everyone recognized as a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "You expect this court to believe that a teenage human has mastered legal codes that take our finest scholars decades to understand?" "Not mastered," Ty replied quietly. "Just read them. all of them. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on the other side of the space station. Then Ty continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. I also studied the Antares trade agreements, the Vega security protocols, and the complete archives of the Galactic Court system dating back for hundreds of cycles. Your Honor, with respect, the charges against me are based on outdated statutes that were specifically revised to prevent exactly this kind of misunderstanding. Park Jimin was frantically scrolling the illegal databases on his holographic display, his silver fingers moving so fast they were just a blur. Suddenly he stopped, his entire body going rigid. He's correct. The prosecutor's voice came through the speaker. Sounding strangled, the amendment exists. How is this possible? Ty took a small step forward, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture of respect. Your Honor, I wasn't hacking into your systems for personal gain or malicious purposes. I was trying to report critical security breaches that could compromise the safety of every being on this station. Judge Morvick leaned forward, his massive bulk making the podium creak ominously. Explain yourself, human. 3 months ago, while working on a routine data recovery project from my Earth colony, I noticed unusual traffic patterns in the galactic communication networks. Someone was using sophisticated techniques to probe defense systems across multiple sectors. The attacks were so subtle that most security programs didn't even register them as threats. The courtroom was dead silent now, every being hanging on Ty's words. Even the energy blob had stopped its nervous pulsing completely. I traced the source to a network of compromised systems that included databases right here on this station, military deployment schedules, civilian evacuation routes, defense grid access codes, everything an enemy would need to launch a devastating attack. Lee Hanna was staring at Ty like she'd never seen him before. Why didn't you report this through official channels? Ty's expression darkened slightly. I tried. I sent reports to 12 different agencies across 6 star systems. Most of them never responded. The ones that did told me that humans weren't qualified to assess alien security systems. One administrator actually laughed and said I should stick to fixing broken farm equipment. Judge Morvack's 6 eyes were now fixed on Ty with laser-like intensity. The purple tint in his scales was fading, replaced by the deep blue that indicated serious concentration. So you took matters into your own hands. I accessed the compromised systems to gather proof. Ty admitted I needed evidence that officials couldn't ignore or dismiss. But before I could compile my report, station security arrested me. The alien prosecutor was still scrolling through data, his movements becoming more frantic by the second. Suddenly he looked up, his face somehow managing to look pale despite the silver skin. Judge Morvick, I'm reading intelligence reports that confirm unusual network activity in this sector. Multiple systems showing signs of subtle infiltration attempts. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The four-armed Zephyrian started tapping all his fingers again. But this time the rhythm was rapid and panicked. The reptilian creatures began hissing to each other in urgent whispers. Judge Morvick sat back in his chair, the massive piece of furniture groaning under his weight. For the first time since the trial began, he looked at Ty with something other than contempt. You're telling this court that you discovered a potential threat that our own security forces missed. Ty nodded simply. Yes, Your Honor, and if my calculations are correct, they're planning to strike soon. Prove it. Judge Morvick snarled, his 6 eyes blazing with challenge and disbelief. The massive alien scales had shifted to an angry red color that made him look like a walking volcano. If you're so brilliant, show us these supposed vulnerabilities. But I warn you, human, if this is some elaborate trick, I'll make sure you spend the next 50 years in a prison cell so deep that your sun's light will never reach you." The courtroom buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. This was no longer a routine trial. It had become a spectacle that would be talked about across the galaxy for years to come. Alien spectators leaned forward in their seats, their various appendages twitching with anticipation. Security Chief Yunsu stepped forward from the back of the courtroom. The tall, stern-faced Korean woman wore the dark blue uniform of the Galactic Security Forces, her chest decorated with medals from 3 different star systems. Her hand rested casually on her plasma weapon as she approached the judge's bench. "Your Honor," she said in accented but clear Galactic Standard, "I strongly advise against allowing the defendant access to our systems, even under supervision. There are risks we cannot calculate." Judge Morvick waved one of his massive clawed hands dismissively. "The human claims to be some kind of genius. Let's see what he can do with a basic terminal under full security lockdown. If he's lying, we'll know within minutes." Tai remained calm as a team of technicians wheeled in what looked like the most basic computer terminal in the galaxy. The device was ancient by galactic standards, a simple input screen with limited processing power that was normally used for filing court documents. It had no network access beyond the courthouse's internal systems, and even that was heavily restricted. There, Judge Morvick pointed at the terminal with obvious satisfaction. "Show us your miraculous hacking skills with that piece of junk." Human, the alien technician, an insect-like creature with compound eyes and clicking mandibles, explained the restrictions in its buzzing voice. "Terminal has access only to public court records and basic system diagnostics, all external connections disabled, all advanced functions locked. Even if somehow breached, damage would be minimal." Tai nodded and walked to the terminal. The alien crowd watched his every move as he sat down and placed his fingers on the strange, glowing keyboard. The symbols weren't even in human script. They were in the standard galactic alphabet that most species used for official business. For a moment, nothing happened. Tai simply stared at the screen, his dark eyes moving across the display as if he was reading something only he could see. Some of the alien spectators began to snicker. The four-armed Zephyrian started tapping his fingers again in what was clearly amusement. Then Tai's hands began to move. His fingers danced across the alien keyboard with impossible speed and precision. Lines of code began appearing on the screen faster than most beings could follow. The simple terminal's display started showing information that shouldn't have been accessible. Network diagrams, security protocols, system architecture maps, security. Chief Yunsu stepped closer, her eyes widening as she recognized what she was seeing. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Those files are stored on completely separate systems." Tai's voice was calm and focused as he worked. "Your basic terminal connects to the court's filing system, which shares a data pathway with the administrative network. That network has a maintenance backdoor that links to the security grid. From there, it's just a matter of following the connections." Within 3 minutes, Tai had mapped the entire station's digital infrastructure. The display showed a complex web of interconnected systems that looked like a three-dimensional maze of light. Red markers began appearing at various points in the network. "Vulnerability 1, Tai said, highlighting a section of the display. "Your quantum encryption uses a predictable pattern based on galactic standard time. Any attacker who knows the timestamp can decode communications with basic mathematics." Hark Jimin, the prosecutor, was furiously taking notes on his holographic tablet. "How is that possible? Our encryption is military grade." "Military grade from 50 years ago," Tai replied without looking away from the screen. "Vulnerability 2. Your firewall system assumes all threats come from outside the network. But if someone gets inside through the maintenance systems, there's almost no internal security. More red markers appeared on the display. Security Chief Yunsu was now standing directly behind Tai, watching his work with growing amazement and horror. Vulnerability 3 through 7. Tai continued, his fingers never stopping their dance across the keyboard. Your AI monitoring system only recognizes attack patterns from known threat databases, but human pattern recognition works differently. We see connections that artificial intelligence misses. The display now showed dozens of weak points in the station's defenses. Each one was explained in simple terms that even the non-technical beings in the courtroom could understand. Tai demonstrated how an attacker could use the kitchen management system to access crew schedules, then use those schedules to predict when security shifts would change. This is incredible, Security Chief Yunsu breathed. We've had teams of experts analyzing these systems for years, and they never found half of what you've shown in 10 minutes. Tai highlighted another section of the network. Vulnerabilities 8 through 12 involve your docking-based systems. An attacker could override the magnetic locks on any spacecraft, then use the environmental controls to create chaos while they escape. Judge Morvak's red scales were slowly shifting back to their normal gray color. His 6 eyes were fixed on the display with the intensity of someone watching their own house burn down. How many more vulnerabilities are there? 17 major ones that could be exploited for a full-scale attack, Tai replied. Probably twice that many minor issues that could be used for espionage or sabotage. That's just what I can see from this limited access point. The courtroom was dead silent except for the soft humming of the terminal's processors. Every being present was staring at the screen in shock and disbelief. The simple human teenager had just torn apart their most advanced security systems using nothing more than basic logic and mathematical principles. Security Chief Yunsu leaned down to whisper in Tai's ear. Could you fix these problems? Tai nodded. Most of them, yes, but there's something else you need to know. His fingers moved across the keyboard again, bringing up a new section of data. While I was mapping your systems, I found traces of the same infiltration patterns I discovered in the other networks. Someone has been using these vulnerabilities to plant monitoring software throughout your entire station. The blood drained from Security Chief Yunsu's face. Are you saying we've been compromised? I'm saying, Tai replied quietly, that whoever is planning to attack already knows everything about your defenses, and based on the data I'm seeing, they're planning to move very soon. As if summoned by his words, the station's emergency alert system suddenly began blaring throughout the courthouse. The emergency alarm screamed through the courthouse like the wails of dying stars. Red warning lights bathed everything in an ominous glow that made the alien faces look even more terrifying than usual. The sound was so loud that several of the smaller creatures in the gallery covered their hearing organs and cowered in their seats. Incoming attack. All personnel to emergency stations. The automated voice boomed through speakers built into the walls, drowning out the panicked screams and alien chatter that erupted throughout the courtroom, while everyone else was jumping up in terror. Tai remained perfectly still in his chair, his fingers still dancing across the terminal keyboard. His dark eyes reflected the red emergency lights as he studied the data streaming across his screen. There was something almost supernatural about his calmness in the chaos. The Void Collective found the back doors I discovered, he said, his voice somehow cutting through all the noise despite being barely above a whisper. They're using them now. Security Chief Yunsu spun around to face the main display screen that dominated one wall of the courtroom. The massive holographic projection flickered to life, showing the space around the station in real time. At first, everything looked normal. the usual traffic of cargo ships and passenger vessels moving along their designated flight paths like fireflies in the darkness. Then the enemy appeared. They didn't announce themselves with dramatic entrances or threatening messages. One moment the space around the station was peaceful, and the next it was filled with sleek, black vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Void Collective ships moved with an eerie silence that was somehow more terrifying than any battle cry. How many? Judge Moravec's voice had lost all its earlier arrogance. The massive alien was gripping his podium so hard that his claws were leaving gouges in the metal. 47 attack vessels, Security Chief Yunsu read from her handheld scanner, her face pale with shock. No, wait, 63. They're materializing from cloak faster than our sensors can count them. The main display zoomed in on one of the enemy ships. It looked like someone had taken a traditional spacecraft design and twisted it into something nightmarish. Sharp angles jutted out at impossible directions, and the hull seemed to ripple like liquid metal. Strange symbols glowed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Station defense grid is activating, announced the spider-like bailiff robot, its mechanical voice somehow managing to sound worried. All weapon systems coming online on the display. The station's massive defense cannons began to emerge from hidden ports along the outer hull. These weren't the small plasma weapons that individual ships carried. These were ship killers designed to vaporize anything that came too close. The barrels were as wide as subway tunnels and crackling with enough energy to power a small city. The cannons fired. Brilliant beams of concentrated energy lanced out toward the enemy fleet, lighting up space like artificial lightning. Any normal attacking force would have been obliterated in seconds, but the Void Collective ships simply weren't there anymore when the beams arrived. They flickered in and out of existence like ghosts, always staying one step ahead of the targeting systems. They're exploiting the sensor delay protocols, Tai said, still typing rapidly, the same vulnerability I marked as number 14 on my list. Your targeting computers rely on predictive algorithms, but they're using quantum phase shifting to stay ahead of the calculations. Park Jimin, the prosecutor, was frantically trying to coordinate with other parts of the station through his communication device. All fighter squadrons are launching, he reported, his silver skin now completely colorless with fear. But they can't get target locks either on the display. Dozens of small fighter craft poured out of the station's launch bays like angry hornets. The sleek vessels moved in perfect formation, their pilots expertly trained in combat maneuvers that had won battles across the galaxy. But against the Void Collective, their expertise meant nothing. The enemy ships didn't even bother fighting back. They simply phased out of normal space whenever the fighters got close, then reappeared somewhere else entirely. It was like watching someone try to punch shadows. They're heading for the docking bays. Security Chief Yunsu shouted over the alarms. If they get inside the station, they won't need to interrupted. His fingers moving even faster across the keyboard. They're going to use vulnerability number 9. The magnetic containment systems. They'll overload the reactor cores from the outside. Judge Morvick stared at the human teenager in growing horror and understanding. You knew this was going to happen. I tried to warn everyone, Ty replied without looking away from his screen. But nobody wanted to listen to a worthless Earth primitive. Remember, the shame in Judge Morvack's 6 eyes was painful to see. His massive shoulders slumped as the full weight of his prejudice crashed down on him. This young human had tried to save them all, and instead of listening, they had put him on trial. The containment fields are fluctuating, Security Chief Yunsu reported, reading from multiple displays at once. If they destabilize completely, the reactor explosion will destroy everything within 100,000 kilometers, including all the civilian ships in the area, added Park Jimin, his voice barely audible through his translation device. Tai finally looked up from his terminal. His dark eyes meeting Judge Morvax's gaze directly. "I can stop them," he said simply. "But I need full system access. Every security protocol, every administrative lock, every safeguard. All of it has to come down so I can work." The request hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Giving a teenager complete control over the station's systems went against every protocol in the book. It was insane, reckless, and completely unprecedented. "You're asking me to trust you with the lives of everyone on this station?" Judge Morvick said slowly. "No," Tai replied. Turning back to his keyboard, "I'm asking you to trust the human you should have listened to in the first place." Security Chief Yunsu looked at the main display, where the Void Collective ships were moving into position round the station like predators surrounding W. Hounded prey. The defense systems were failing. The fighters were useless, and the reactor cores were already showing signs of instability. "Give him access," she said suddenly. "Give him everything." Judge Morvax's claws hovered over the authorization pad on his podium. Once he pressed it, there would be no going back. The fate of everyone on the station, maybe everyone in the entire star system, would rest in the hands of the quiet human boy they had all dismissed as primitive. The reactor alarms grew louder, more urgent. On the display, the first containment field flickered and failed. Judge Morvick pressed the authorization button. "Full system access granted," he announced, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "Kim Tai, the station is yours." Tai's fingers moved across the keyboard one more time, and suddenly every screen in the courthouse lit up with data streams that flowed like digital waterfalls. "Now," he said quietly, "let me show you what a worthless Earth primitive can do." The moment Judge Morvick granted full system access, something extraordinary happened. Every screen, display, and holographic interface in the courthouse began pulsing with streams of data that moved like liquid light. Tai's fingers became a blur across the alien keyboard, typing faster than any human should have been able to move. It was as if he had suddenly become one with the station's computer systems. "What is he doing?" whispered the four-armed Zephyrian, all his fingers frozen in mid-tap as he watched in amazement. Security Chief Yunsu was monitoring multiple displays at once, her eyes wide with disbelief. "He's rewriting the entire defense grid protocol in real time." She breathed. "That should be impossible. It would take our best programmers weeks to do what he's doing in minutes." On the main display, the Void Collective ships were closing in for their final attack. Their dark hulls rippled with malevolent energy as they prepared to overload the station's reactor cores. The first enemy vessel was already extending strange, tentacle-like appendages toward the station's outer hull, ready to drain its power systems, but Tai was 3 steps ahead. "Rerouting primary power through auxiliary channels," he announced, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. Suddenly, the station's lights dimmed for a moment, then blazed brighter than ever, creating false energy signatures across all external sensors. The effect was immediate and spectacular. On the enemy ship's scanners, the space station suddenly appeared to multiply. Where there had been one target, now there seemed to be dozens, all broadcasting identical energy signatures. The Void Collective vessels hesitated, their pilots confused by the impossible readings. Ghost protocols activated. Tai continued, his fingers never stopping their dance across the keyboard. Phantom heat signatures are now broadcasting from 17 different locations. Their targeting systems won't be able to tell which one is real. Park Jimin was frantically trying to understand what was happening through his communication device. "The enemy ships are breaking formation," he reported in amazement. "They're attacking targets that aren't there. On the main display, the sleek, black vessels were firing their weapons at empty space, their deadly energy beams passing harmlessly through holographic projections. It was like watching a pack of predators trying to hunt mirages in a desert. But Tai wasn't finished. His dark eyes reflected the scrolling data as he dove deeper into the station systems, accessing functions that most aliens didn't even know existed, inverting the magnetic containment fields. He said, his voice taking on an almost mystical quality, instead of containing our reactor energy. They're now going to attract and absorb theirs, Security Chief Yunsu gasped as she realized what he was doing. You're turning the station into a giant energy sponge. The first Void Collective ship that tried to drain the station's power got the shock of its existence, instead of energy flowing from the station to the ship. It was suddenly being pulled in the opposite direction. The alien vessel's dark hull began to glow as its own power systems were overwhelmed by the unexpected reversal. Warning, enemy vessel experiencing cascade failure, announced the spider-like bailiff robot, its mechanical voice actually sounding pleased. Power core overload imminent. The enemy ship tried to retreat, but it was too late. Its systems, designed to steal energy, couldn't handle the massive influx of power that Tai was forcing through the connection. With a brilliant flash that lit up the entire courtroom, the vessel simply disintegrated into cosmic dust. The other Void Collective ships immediately backed away from the station, their pilots realizing they were facing something completely beyond their understanding. But Tai wasn't about to let them escape. Activating hunter-killer protocols, he said, his fingers flying across multiple keyboards that the technicians had wheeled over to support his work. Defense grid is now operating in offensive mode. The station's massive defense cannons began moving with fluid precision, no longer firing randomly into space but tracking their targets with supernatural accuracy. Tai had somehow overcome the quantum phase shifting that had made the enemy ships untouchable. How is he doing that? Judge Morvik asked, his 6 eyes fixed on the display in wonder and terror. Human pattern recognition, Security Chief Yunsu answered, finally understanding. Their phase shifting follows quantum mechanical rules, but he's not trying to predict where they'll be. He's calculating where they can't be, then eliminating all the impossible locations until only the real one remains, one by one. The defense cannons began finding their marks. The Void Collective ships, so confident in their technological superiority, found themselves being systematically destroyed by weapons they had easily avoided just minutes before. Their dark hulls erupted in brilliant explosions that painted the darkness of space with rainbow colors. Enemy fleet is in full retreat, Park Jimin reported, his silver skin finally regaining some of its natural color. All remaining vessels are jumping to hyperspace, but even as the immediate threat disappeared, Tai continued working. His hands moved across the interfaces with the grace of a pianist performing a master's symphony, repairing damage, strengthening defenses, and closing every vulnerability he had identified earlier. Station shields at maximum capacity, Security Chief Yunsu announced, all systems operating at peak efficiency. Internal security protocols have been upgraded beyond anything. In our databases, the emergency alarms finally fell silent. The red warning lights faded back to normal, and for the first time in what felt like hours, the courthouse was quiet except for the soft humming of computers and the amazed whispers of the alien spectators. Tai leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. The screens round him still displayed streams of data, but now they showed green lights and optimal readings across the board. He had not only saved the station, but had improved its defenses beyond anything the original designers had imagined possible. Judge Morvik stood slowly, his massive frame seeming somehow smaller and more humble than before. The arrogance that had defined him was completely gone. replaced by something that looked like genuine respect and deep shame. "Kin Tai," he said, his voice formal and carrying the weight of official ceremony. "I owe you an apology that words cannot adequately express. My prejudice nearly cost the lives of everyone on this station and countless others throughout the system." The courtroom was dead silent as every being present focused on the judge's words. "I formally apologize for my behavior and my assumptions," Judge Morvick continued. "You are clearly one of the most brilliant individuals I have ever encountered, and I am honored to offer you the position of Chief Security Advisor for this sector, with full authority to implement whatever changes you deem necessary." Tai nodded quietly, his expression unchanged by the dramatic reversal of his circumstances. "I accept, Your Honor, but I have one condition." "Name it." Judge Morvick replied immediately. "No more assumptions about what any species can or cannot do based on where they come from." Tai said simply, "Brilliance can come from anywhere, and it usually comes from the places you least expect." Judge Morvick's 6 eyes blinked in sequence. His species' way of showing deep agreement. "Agreed. From this day forward, this court will judge individuals by their actions and abilities, not by their origins." Security Chief Yunsu stepped forward and saluted Tai with the formal military gesture used. "Across the galaxy, it will be an honor to serve under your command, Chief Advisor." As the word spread throughout the station about what had happened, beings from dozens of different species began gathering outside the courthouse. They wanted to see the young human who had saved them all, the quiet teenager who had proven that human brilliance could triumph over both alien arrogance and technological superiority. But Tai just sat quietly at his terminal, already working on the next problem, ready to protect the galaxy one vulnerability at a time. The ND.